I'm Rob Dansman, and this is The Better Semester, where I provide insight and actionable advice to parents of college students. I'm a nationally certified counselor and licensed clinical mental health counselor. Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got today Jason Sarouhan. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad to be here, Rob. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Well, Jason, we were just talking before we started recording, and obviously you're here to talk about gap year stuff. I would love to hear your background. I'd love to hear about where you went to school and how you got to where you are, and then what exactly you do.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fun set of questions. So as you mentioned, I'm Jason Saroyan. I have two professional roles right now. For the last 15 years, I've worked alongside my wife, Jane, as an accredited gap year counselor or coach or consultant. All the terms tend to be interchangeable here in the US. And that role is really to support students who are thinking about taking a gap year or considering this idea of gap time. If students do end up choosing to do that and they want to work with a coach to help them, our job is to support them in figuring out what their concrete goals are for that time and then connecting them with reputable vetted options and support them through the journey that they have, whether that's 3 months or an entire year or more. So that's one of the roles that I have, and the other role that I have is as the interim executive director of the Gap Year Association. And the Gap Year Association is the standards and development organization as determined by the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission that develops standards of best practice and an accreditation process for both programs and consultants to go through so that the public can be confident in the choices that they're making around their gap years. And so when you hear the term accredited gap year consultant or an accredited gap year program, you know that they've gone through an incredibly rigorous process of assessment in order to earn that moniker. So I've been serving in that role for a year. I just celebrated the 1 year anniversary 2 days ago, and I've decided I'm going to stay on for at least another year to support the organization. We have done some incredible strategic planning in this last year, and I'm really excited to see where this all takes us. So that's a lot of my day today. I work one-on-one with students and have a whole cadre of students that are out there in the world right now. They all launched in September and they've just begun their gap time. We just wrapped up bringing home our students from last year, and soon enough we'll be out on the road talking with potential gappers, folks who are in their junior or senior year of high school, or they've gone into college and they're determining that's not the right space for them, and talk to them about what a gap year could look like, say, starting in fall of 2026.
I want to go back to the accreditation because I could imagine a lot of parents don't fully appreciate what that means. Like it mean I know you said it's to make sure that the public is aware that these are safe and vetted programs and also
Mm.
consultants. What exactly do programs and consultants like? What are some of the standards that they have to meet? Like what do they have to demonstrate to the accrediting body?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And this is where the difference of something like a membership as a program to the Gap Year Association differs from an accreditation. And I also think that this is special. And I really love talking about the Gap Year Association because it's a nonprofit. We're here to serve the public. That's our role. And there are many great resources about gap years out in the world. And most of those organizations that are for profit, which there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, that's just a business model. But what a program would have to demonstrate to one website where they're advertising and just getting their word out there might be a much lower standard than, say, what you have to demonstrate to even become a member of the Gap Year Association. So just on a fundamental level, to become a member, you have to have a demonstrated risk management plan. You have to have been in business actively hosting Gap Year students for over 2 years before you can even apply for membership. You need to have a comprehensive essential eligibility criteria that's publicly available. Who can participate on your program? Who's going to be successful on your program? What are the limitations of service that you have? Are you a therapeutic-based experience? Are you more of a wellness program? Are you a more typical gap year-based program? Are you able to accommodate everyone of all abilities? What are your mental health resources? So all of that needs to be demonstrated. Again, this is just general membership. This is just as a general member listing. And then finally, of course, we believe in a strong ethic towards as much diversity as possible and accessibility as possible within the gap year space. One of the biggest misconceptions about a gap year is that it has to cost an arm and a leg to be able to participate. And while, of course, some of the more formalized gap year programs do have a bigger price tag than an independently organized opportunity, I've seen now over 15 years of gap year consulting that a student with almost any budget can have really meaningful gap time. So that's just membership. But now we talk about accreditation. So that member organization says, yes, I'm ready to go. I want to have that bigger mention. I want to be illustrated with this other group of organizations that are demonstrating their best practices. And so depending upon the organization and depending upon the kind of programming that they have, they will have to complete and submit evidence for up to five macro categories of standards. Every single organization accredited by the Gap Year Association is responsible for what we call affectionately the 1.x.x's, which means if you imagine, the classic Russian nesting dolls, the one designates the big doll, and then the next X designates the middle doll, and then the final X designates the smallest doll. And so there are a series of standards. In the ones, for example, there's almost 30 standards that organizations have to demonstrate evidence for. And every single organization is responsible for this because it's about experiential education. And at its heart, at its core, a gap year is all about an individual getting out into the world so that they can grow and develop through these more hands-on experiences. We don't discriminate if an experience is in the classroom. We think there's a ton of value to learning from the classroom, but most gap year experiences offer another level of hands-on learning. And so all of the 1.x.x's they surround that. It's all about whether or not the programmatic experience has reflection built in. There's surveys that a program is responsible for at different points in the program to make sure that students are being cared for, but also that learning is taking place in a meaningful way. The standards talk about a progression towards independence. So starting in a place of greater support, but that programming allowing students to take on more responsibility and ownership as it goes on. So that's just the ones. A program that includes volunteering or internships where you're going to be interacting with vulnerable populations would be responsible for the twos. A program that takes students way out into the backcountry or deep into the jungle somewhere where medical care is not immediately available is responsible for the threes. It's an added level of risk management. An organization that is involved in being, for example, that utilizes an outsourced line of public transportation or works with a river rafting guide would be responsible for the fives, right? So these are these third-party relationships. So I can tell you, as someone who's been on the standards and accreditation committee now for the GYA for 13 years. I witnessed the birth of the first draft of standards, and I've helped to revise every iteration of that since, that we've just seen an incredible array of professionals come in, lawyers, doctors, program providers, individuals in the insurance industry to help advise around best practices. And the same is true for our consultant standards as well.
I didn't realize how sophisticated the standards were and the accreditation was.
Yeah, it
So,
generally takes an organization 3 to 6 months from start to finish to even make its way through the accreditation process.
and you had mentioned Federal Trade Commission before,
Mhm.
and I forget what other agency.
The Department of Justice, yeah.
Okay, do you all also work with the State Department as well? Because I mean, there's a big international component to this, and I wonder like what other agencies you all work with.
Neither of those agencies
Hmm.
is is part of the guiding oversight for the Gap Year Association. And frankly, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission have very little hands-on work every year with our association. We are responsible for reporting, but beyond that, it's not as if there's a huge level of oversight. When the association was founded, there was a really strong desire to have a sense of governmental legitimacy,
Mm,
and this made the most sense during the founding of the association. One might say, well, why isn't it the Department of Education? This is all educational, and that would be fair as a suggestion. I think because we're talking about programming that most of these are companies or businesses. The Federal Trade Commission was involved, and the Department of Justice is because we are truly an advocacy-based association. A big part of our mission is to create more access to the gap year, and that includes outreach and scholarships and research. But no, I would agree with you. We are involved in many of the international domains outside the U.S. and the uh, Department of Justice has been our main kind of overseer.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
I want to take a step back and let's talk a little bit about your kind of personal path into this. We've had conversations about this before, but I would love to hear the origin story, um,
sure. Yeah.
because this is not a typical degree. You don't get a degree in gap year or gap year science or um, yeah. How did you get here? Let's hear the story.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And I enjoy telling the story, mostly because I'm on the other side of it, right? Like so many stories, it begins with a moment of unexpected crisis in a certain way. So let me lead you in. So I grew up in the Bay Area in California. I grew up in San Mateo, and I went to a medium-sized public high school. And at our school, way back when I was in school, there were like three AP classes total that were offered in the school. And if you took two of them, you were a rock star and probably bound for, an Ivy, right? It's such a different world that we live in now. And the pressure then is so distinctly different from what I see the pressure now for a lot of young adults. And I was really involved in high school. I was a co-student body president. I was involved on a couple of different sports teams. I was in the plays. I was in the band. I had
Hmm.
a job, right? I did all the things. I really enjoyed high school, as did my brother. He's only 14 months younger, and we really, appreciated our time. And when it came time to applying to college, I was a little bit at ends. It felt like the expectation of my family was that I would go to undergraduate. And I also didn't really think at all about going outside of California beyond applying to a school in Oregon, a really small liberal arts school in Oregon. I didn't think about going to Colorado. I certainly didn't think about going to the East Coast. And so I was fortunate enough to get accepted at UC San Diego and at UC Davis. And I decided to go to UC San Diego mostly on a whim. I was literally, lying in bed in my room on the very last day I could make the decision about where to go to college. And my mom's like, you're not leaving until you make the choice. And thankfully, we had visited UC San Diego, and it was so beautiful there. And I'm not a super beach-oriented person, or certainly wasn't then. And I just remember really enjoying the expansiveness of that part of Southern California. I liked that there was an air of desert that was there, and only later did I realize how much desert surrounds San Diego and the greater Los Angeles area. And so I decided to go to school. And I say all of this as a lead up because I was a pretty on the straight and narrow kid. I didn't drink before I went to college. I didn't actually have my first drink in college until I was, you know, well into the first part of my junior year, which a lot of people today would just like kind of laugh at that. My friends laughed at me at that in high school. I was president of Friday Night Live, the non-drinking club. BYOB was bring your own banana to your banana split party we're having on Friday night. So, pretty on the straight and narrow. But I will tell you that when I got to school, I was kind of overwhelmed. UC San Diego is a huge school. At that time, had about 15,000 undergrads, from what I can recall. And I was in the Thurgood Marshall College. There were 5 colleges on campus, and it felt like I was in a completely different universe. I could decide if I was going to class every day. I could decide how much time I was going to spend on my work. I discovered ultimate frisbee, and that became a really important part of my life. It became, the fraternity without the fraternity. It was a ton of community. It was athleticism, which I really enjoyed a lot at that time in my life. And so I would say that things were going really well academically as well because I discovered anthropology. And, Rob, I don't know what your college decision for your major, that process looked like, but I went in undeclared, but almost immediately declared sociology because my mom said that it was good with people. And those two things really don't go hand in hand at all or bear any relevance. I took a sociology class. I thought, this is interesting. I took another one. I met a really nice girl in that class, and she's like, oh, you know what? You should be an anthropology major because it's like sociology, but you get to travel. And I was like, sold. I'm an anthropology major. And I was an anthropology major. And literally, that's how my major was decided. Thankfully, I fell in line with Jim Moore, and he is a pretty renowned primatologist. UC San Diego focuses on biological anthropology, which is the study of other primates to better understand human behavior, whereas physical anthropology is the study of like stones and bones to be able to understand our past. And that was not the emphasis at UC San Diego. It was a lot about other primates. And Jim Moore had studied in Gombe Stream with Jane Goodall, and she just passed away a few days ago, as many of you know. And I was just back in touch with Jim, and both of us were reminiscing about our times in Tanzania. He inspired me to go to Tanzania ultimately later in my college career, which is where my gap time kicks in. And so I say this big lead up because everything seemed like it was going so great until about this time, October of my junior year, when coaching and captaining our ultimate frisbee team, I was leading a drill and I went to make this move and dive through the air to catch a frisbee. And when I came up, my right arm couldn't move up past my shoulder. And I realized that I had significantly and severely injured my shoulder joint. And it sent me into kind of a wild cascade. And I think I recognize this now in a lot of young adults that I see the house of cards of our identity is so fragile at this age. We're open to so much, we're excited about so much, but what we actually feel aligned with can be quite tenuous. And what I felt aligned with was being an anthropology student and being an ultimate frisbee player. And all of a sudden, with what ended up being a torn rotator cuff, I was no longer an ultimate frisbee player. And I made it through that fall quarter and I went home for the holiday break. I had surgery done on it. Being an idiot at 20, I did zero physical therapy. The surgeon said you can, start using your arm again in April. I immediately went back out and started playing ultimate frisbee and re-tore it within the first month of playing. And basically was, in this moment of real crisis of I don't really know what I'm doing right now. I'm injured again. I don't seem to be able to pull it together. School is starting to slide and my focus is starting to drop. What do I do? And I called my parents after I had gone back to the first week of what is spring quarter. There's 3 quarters in the typical academic cycle at UCSD. And I was like, Mom and Dad, I'm coming home. Like I'm not hacking it right now. And I don't really think I'm going to make it through this quarter academically viable. And I had a really good academic career up to that point. And there was silence on the phone. And then they said, so are you going to go back? And I literally said, I don't know. I can't tell you right now. I feel like I'm literally in a moment of crisis. And so I returned home and I went back to live in my childhood bedroom and I went back to my high school job working at a convenience store. And I sat at home and watched 60 Minutes and built Star Wars models, hanging out with my parents. And that got old within about 2 months. And thank goodness, Rob, that my other primatology professor, Lynn Miller, called me and said, Jason, didn't you say at one point you wanted to go to Africa? I know your parents have been to Kenya. I know you're inspired by, Jim Moore's Tanzania. I'm going to go track primates in the jungle in Africa. Do you want to come with me? And I said, oh my gosh, Lynn, you're a savior. I just applied to a conservation program there anyway. Yes. And I did. And I got on an international flight, which is the first international flight I had ever been on in my entire life. I flew to Uganda. I got off the plane in Kampala in the middle of the night, and there was nobody there to greet me. And I had giant duffel bag in each hand and a backpack on my back. And all of a sudden, I was on what was the equivalent of gap time. Somebody finally came to pick me up after I borrowed money from a local who was hanging out outside, and they showed me how to use a payphone. And I called the hotel, and it started a 4 month incredible journey throughout East Africa where I got to track chimpanzees out in the middle of the rainforest in a rainstorm, watching them do some incredible things and the behaviors I'd only learned about in books and getting to watch it up close and personal. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, which at that point in time was certainly the biggest physical feat and honestly emotional feat that I've ever succeeded at. I think I was in such a tough place in that moment of my life. The fact that I actually stood on the top of the peak and watched the sunrise was pretty important that that happened and that I was able to make that happen. And I dove headlong into this incredible conservation and wildlife program where I was living out in the bush by myself with a group of hunter-gatherers. I was cataloging their tool culture. I was really interested in tools at that time. I, lived a fantasy of getting to run around, digging up tubers, collecting berries, pretending like we were hunting, and learning all about this last remaining group of hunter-gatherers in East Africa, the Hadzabe, who are, ultimately relegated to a tiny fraction of the space that they should be inhabiting, in their typical daily practices. So I give you this long lead up because I went from being somebody who was feeling quite broken, stuck, and not confident to returning home and returning back to UC San Diego, effectively just getting straight A's for the rest of my time there. I was so passionate about learning. I was so excited about what I'd learned. I had discovered that while I had thought I wanted to be a field-based conservation biologist, that in fact what I wanted to do was much more oriented to humans. My mom was right. I do like people and I enjoy working with people. And it really helped direct the course of my time coming out of college. I immediately went into a leadership role, helping to guide backpacking-based trips. I took an outward bound instructor course and started working in a more advanced way on longer expeditions, and ultimately found my way into leading international programs. And kind of the rest is history. I met my wife through this work. She hired me as a field-based leader late in my 20s. She asked me to come east to New England and become an Africa Asia program director for an amazing international community service-based organization. We fell in love, and we've worked together now for the better part of 20 years. So I have a really unconventional story. I hold a BA in anthropology, and right now I am enjoying probably the pinnacle of my professional career, getting to support as many gap year-based experiences as I can through this interim executive director role, and having worked now with thousands and thousands of young adults to guide them and support them in their courageous exploration of who they are and the world that they want to inhabit.
Jason, thank you that, for all that background, because I think sometimes it to be I don't want to project onto you that like you were being vulnerable, but telling a story that doesn't have this perfect linear track, and acknowledging a lot of the challenges along the way, I think can be really hard. One of the things
Thank you.
one of the things that strikes me about your story, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and we've talked a little bit about this before, is one of the inflection points that you talked about was not only that you tore your rotator cuff and you got hurt and you started trying to push through, but there was a point where you said, I'm not doing well, and you asked for help.
Yeah,
And that seems very different than what I see a lot of young men and women doing today.
yeah.
And I wonder, like, I don't know, there are a lot of questions buried in this, but what what do you see students doing at those inflection points? Are they trying to double down and push through and
Mm.
avoid responsibility or acknowledging that things are wrong? Or do you hear them asking for help they just don't know what the options are? Like what are you seeing?
I feel like the more I have worked with young adults, and now let's say that professionally I've worked with young adults full time for 25 years. I feel like I have witnessed the fundamental aspect of being 18 to 25, which is you are in the very first chapters of adult independence and responsibility. And the reality is, you pretty much have zero experience making decisions for yourself, right? Young adults today, probably maybe more than ever, um, have so much of the path laid out in front of them with as many guardrails as possible because failure does not seem like it is an option. And I don't mean failure like failing out of college. I mean, that certainly, that is pretty, that'd be really challenging for any young adult. I mean, not doing well on a test and having to figure out what to do about it. I mean, not feeling confident to be able to go out of the basic community boundaries that have been laid out for them to be able to be out in the world. And we can talk about all the origins of this and why is this happening right now. But I think to be 18 to 25 is just inherently a challenging time where young adults are ultimately making decisions and unaware of what the potential consequences could be. But what I'm witnessing today is that not only are students faced with those decisions, but they're terrified of them. And they're terrified of them because perhaps different than 25 years ago or 50 years ago, many of these young adults actually haven't had to make a lot of the intermediary decisions for themselves and bear witness to what that outcome is. Consequence is gets such a negative connotation, but consequence is just an outcome, right? It can be negative or positive depending on the way you look at it. I think a lot of young adults aren't really able to make bold decisions for themselves because they're really afraid of the consequences and their parents are really afraid of the consequences. And it's a scary world, right? I mean, I really get it. I really get why a parent who is concerned about the success for their child would want to help them succeed pretty much at all costs, up to the point where they no longer really have a direct influence. I get it. I'm a parent. We have a 15-year-old. I look at some of my parenting choices. I'm like, wow, is that what my dad would have done? I think my dad would have like handed me $5 and been like,
See
get
ya.
back from the mall on your own. Right. Like, it's like, and I mean, truly, and I know these things get cited a lot, but this isn't an exaggeration. My brother and I, at 12 years old, would get home from school without there being any parent there, probably having walked home. We would get on our bikes. We would ride around to wherever we wanted to ride around to, not being troublemakers, just being kids. And we would make sure we were home by dinner. And my parents had no sense of where we were during that time or what decisions we were making for ourselves. They had to instill values and trust that hopefully we'd make good decisions. Did we always make good decisions? No, we didn't. But we always were able to actually move through those spaces of what happened in those decisions. And so I see a lot of parents being afraid. I really empathize. I feel a lot of compassion. And also part of the outcome of being a young adult today, growing up with a device in your hand and being able to see absolutely everything that's possible to see in the world in the palm of your hand all the time. I literally do not think, as someone who studied anthropology, that humans were meant to experience as much as we experience today. I don't think we know how to hold the trauma. I don't think we know how to understand how something could be happening to someone across the world and you can't make a difference or impact on that person's life. And I think it leaves a lot of young adults feeling kind of helpless, kind of hopeless, and really wondering what it means for them to grow up to be an adult today. Um, we have an amazing set of nephews and nieces, all of whom have recently graduated from college. And I watched one of our nephews working this summer out on Cape Cod, and he lived out there in my mother-in-law's home. Amazing! What an incredible opportunity for him. And this was his third year working at a restaurant out there, and he made an incredible amount of money. But I also witnessed him applying for jobs, literally every single day and just getting shot down over and over and over. I don't think he was reaching too far. I think it's just a really hard time to be 22 years old and trying to get a job. And what does that mean for him? That he can make more money as a waiter than he can, and he can actually have that job and as a server rather than he can't get a job wanting to actually create change in a public domain, in a public space. I think a lot of young adults are facing these very same things, which is how do I even make a mark? Who am I, let alone like how do I actually manifest in the world today? And so I say all of that because yeah, you could hear my story and say, man, just get over it. You hurt your shoulder. Like, what does that mean? At the time, it meant a lot. It meant my identity. It meant a big part of my identity, which again wasn't as deep as my identity is today at twice that age. And so I think about that and I think about the young adults who are growing up today and the opportunities they've had. And I feel a ton of sympathy and empathy, but truly sympathy for young adults because those students who are bold enough to consider a gap year, for example, are students who are saying, there's something that I need right now that I am not getting from the paths that are right in front of me. And I'm not saying I don't want to go to college. I'm not saying I don't want to have a career. I'm not saying I want to just sit at home. But what I am saying is, I think I need to do something first. And whatever that is for them, that is likely ultimately the gut intuition that they know is going to help them be successful later on, or content, or happy, right? The things that we truly want for them as adults.
So I have a bazillion more questions from that, but I want to stay disciplined. I'm going to stay disciplined on this. Um, all right. So this is kind of a softball question, but I don't intend it to be.
Sure.
So what the big tent of Gap Year, all the organizations,
Mhm.
what do they have to offer, like the young adult, or the high school kid that is just not getting traction freshman year, or they identify that something's not right. I don't know what's right. What do these gap year programs have to offer? And I know that that's a broad question because there are lots of different versions of them. But I mean, you listed out like kind of therapeutic versions, wellness versions, and then kind of your traditional, typical versions of gap year.
Mm.
What do they have to offer? These kids that are addicted to TikTok. They're also talking about 6 and 7 all the time. I don't know why. Um, I had to hear it all weekend, all weekend. Um, no, but I mean, like, so they're exposed to a fire hydrant of content and challenges to identity and ego, and maybe undermining who they think they are, and everyone's winning except for them, and social comparison. So, yeah, what do gap years have to offer, or how are they competing against all the noise out there?
Yeah. Well, and I want to make a distinction between the idea of gap time and a gap year program. And I'm not putting a value judgment in either of these, but if we're talking the big tent, so gap time is really a defined period of time that an individual takes that's got intentionality behind it so that they can learn and grow and develop. And generally it's through more of these hands-on experiences, right? So in in the broadest sense of the term, a student moving out of their family's home and getting a job could somewhere in some way, someone's frame of being be gap time because it is not them, say, going off to community college, or it's not them going to a four-year school. It's not them going into the military, or it's not them going to a vocational school, right? It's not the traditional next step of education. And so, and remember, this is what we prescribe for young adults, right? We prescribe a next step of education. I'm like one of the only one of my peers who ended at a BA, right? Everyone else had to end at a terminal degree or a master's, right? That's I feel on one hand, fortunate that I was able to have a professional career, and also, hungry for that additional knowledge myself, even today, and nearly 50 years old. I still hope that will be a path in my life one day, but it didn't need to be for me at that time. It almost certainly does now. So a young adult who's thinking about taking gap time can probably seek that in a wide variety of ways. There are many independent experiences out there, right? There are thousands of farms and ranches and retreat centers where you can go and in exchange for 20 hours a week of your work and labor on that farm, you get room and you get board. And so you get to be there in this amazing spot in New Zealand or Greece or somewhere else around the world that you're excited about. And it's basically cost neutral. There are ways to earn money in your gap year. There is volunteering. You can do an internship experience, right? There is this wide array of options. Many of them have less built-in inherent structure than the other part of your question, which is what does a gap year program have to offer? And the Gap Year Association really deals in gap year programming, right? And what makes that different than a student just going off to volunteer in Costa Rica on an organic farm is this built-in level of mentorship and guidance and reflection. And John Dewey, who is the kind of godfather of experiential education and is quoted many times over in the educational philosophy. If to paraphrase him, we don't learn through experience, we learn through reflecting on experience. And this is the equivalent of, I've mentioned Star Wars once, so I'm going to just go down that path again. You can watch the movie Star Wars A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back, some of the originals. We're going to harken back to the 70s and 80s, and you can be like, wow, those are really interesting films, and Darth Vader's a villain, and yeah, like great stuff, really great for the time. Or you could read a book by a Buddhist philosopher that couches Star Wars in a Buddhist lens and realize that actually Darth Vader was just a young child who had a lot of trauma and ultimately made a lot of bad choices. And in the end, every single person around him in the galaxy thought he was the most evil person ever, except for his estranged son, who somehow found it in his heart to have compassion in one of the hardest moments and actually saw that there was still the possibility for this person to be good and that there's goodness in him and that we can always make a different choice. And in the end, right before he dies, Darth Vader does make a different choice. You don't get that out of just watching the movie.
Right.
You get that because someone who's really knowledgeable analyzed this through a lot of other study and was able to create a framework that one can actually digest and read. I'm a Star Wars nerd. I read that book. It kind of changed my entire perspective on this thing that I already resonated with. So let's just back that out for a minute. That's metaphor for let's talk about a gap year. A student can just go travel willy-nilly around Europe, and sure, there'll be lessons learned there, and that could be positive for someone. But to go and do that in the framework of an art history program, working with mentors who are super passionate about architecture and art, and we're going to take you to the Forum in Rome, who are going to take you to the Colosseum and couch it in history in a way that's going to bring this to life. There's no contest. You spending 2 days walking around Rome and then going to a club at night versus going to do that, like there's no contest to me which has more reflective educational value for a young adult. That's what these gap year programs are doing, whether it's a wilderness-based experience or a facilitated internship, or you're going and you are having a cultural immersion experience, or there's service learning involved. That is what these programs are bringing to life. So when a student does choose to take this time, they're stepping off the path. They know what point B is, right? They graduated from high school, point A, point B is one of these other educational platforms. That journey is going to allow them to immediately access what is important to them and the learning that they're having, so that then they can go back to college and, like me, as that conservation and wildlife biology student, and go, wow, I was in that village the day after that elephant came through and destroyed all of the fields of food for the year. When we're talking about conservation of elephants, we need to be talking about the people and the proximity to people and the people that they're impacting. Because when that village is saying, we need this wild elephant culled, and you have conservationists saying no culling of wild elephants, we've got a real discourse that needs to happen. That's conservation right there. I can't learn that just from the book. I need to be actually out there experiencing it. And that, I think, is the value of these gap year programs, is that they are bringing to life all this amazing learning and allowing you to take that learning and apply it to that next chapter.
It sounds like they're helping curate a narrative.
That's yes, but they're also allowing students to create the narrative. And
Right,
that's the
right.
place that is different than like how we go on vacation as adults, right? We can choose to go on some amazing adventure guided experience, and that guide will take us on that experience and they're going to help with the narrative. In the case of a gap year program, they're going to set the framework. They're going to give students the tools to be successful in that framework. And then little by little, those guides are going to draw back, and the students are the ones who are moving forward with the lead, which I think is a beautiful aspect of that kind of programming.
How have some of these programs needed to change over the years, either because of
Mm.
geopolitical issues, financial constraints, or financial realities like 2008, or market demand, where parents are saying, like, no, I want my son or daughter to be in contact with me 5 times a day through WhatsApp. And I mean, like, how have programs changed? Because I'm sure they've needed to change over time.
They have evolved a lot over time. I think the geopolitical landscape has been one that all study abroad and all gap year has always had to have a very consistent finger on the pulse of what's happening around the world. A great example is that in Nepal we effectively just had a coup occur, and programming that has been confidently going to Nepal for many decades had to step back and say, whoa, hold on a moment. This reminds us of the 90s. We're not actually 100% sure we can be here. Thank goodness we have a relationship in Bhutan, and perhaps we can switch the programming to there. The same thing has happened in East Africa. Kenya, has had so many incidents, unfortunately, that have kept programming from being there confidently because families aren't feeling secure about students going to Kenya, even though there's so many beautiful regions of Kenya to go to, and so many regions where you could go where risk is incredibly low, and Tanzania has really benefited from that, right? So that has been a very consistent part of gap year programming. But you are, I think, intuiting a really different part of how gap year programming has changed, which is in response to the students. So I'll
Hmm.
give you a couple of examples. Technology is one, and my wife and I have laughed that we got out of direct programming just in time because the first, cell phones that students could have, those were, had been there for quite a while, but no real mobile phone that a student would have would work abroad, right? It just the networks weren't vast enough. So that wasn't that big of an issue for us in direct programming. But what became an issue is the smartphone. And the smartphone, which allowed students to be able to utilize Wi-Fi ultimately, which, the age of an internet cafe is like long gone and a
Yeah.
distant fond memory for most of us. But when students had Wi-Fi enabled phones, when all of a sudden you could change out a SIM card, when all of a sudden you could have an eSIM, programs all of a sudden had to start addressing this in a serious way. At first, programs were essentially having students hand their phones over. The program would lock the phone with in only a program known lock code. It would go into a bag, and/or students could only use it as a way to take photos. As time has progressed and students have become more symbiont, I guess I'll say, the symbiosis of being within the digital realm is very difficult to extricate. It's almost as if this is an appendage. And again, I don't say that in a way that's mocking. I think that most of us would be hard pressed to hand over our device today for 3 days, let alone 3 months, and feel like that we wouldn't feel the impact of that. I think
That
most of
sounds
us would.
fantastic to me. Oh,
It does.
I would love to. I would love, but most people, most normal
I
people.
I think most people wouldn't, and I think most people would be terrified of that because this is the way that we feel interconnected. And so programs know that there are other ways to be connected, and there are other ways that are beneficial to be connected. And so some of the things that we started seeing on programs when we were in a more interim period of this, when policies hadn't been solidified, was that students were contacting home in the very first moments of programming, right? They would be contacting home in the first week, like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Why did I choose to do this? Feelings that every student on every program basically has ever had since programming started. But before the phone, where you could communicate home to your parents on WhatsApp and send the emergency message out, we had to lean into our group mates. We had to lean into our leaders. We had to actually deal with the emotions that we were feeling, that adversity, and find a way through, around, or over it. And that was very challenging and still is very challenging for a lot of students. And I feel very badly for a lot of parents because it's the worst. All we want to do is protect our kids. And if you're getting that text message from 2,000 miles away that your child who you love dearly, who you'd give anything for, is suffering, that's a really hard place to be in as a parent. And if a student is always able to pull that escape hatch in the first sign of any adversity, well, that's not serving anyone either. And so gap year programs have really had to come up with creative digital policies. Most of them have landed somewhere on, for the first couple weeks of programs, it is a complete digital detox for students. And then as the program continues, the students will shape and craft the digital policies for within the group. So that could mean we're continuing on the digital detox. We only once every month, shoot a text home to say, hey, I'm alive, I'm safe, everything's happy. Sometimes groups will say, no, you can only use your device in the downtimes. Of course, no devices at meetings, and other programs have different policies. And so we've actually seen programs have to adapt to students and their needs. And this is a need of students. It is a mental health need of theirs to stay connected in a certain way. And so to rip that away is actually not doing them any kind of a service. So that's one thing. The other thing that we have found is that the type of programming, the rigor of the programming, and the length of programming have all dramatically shifted and changed. And so to give you a way of example, my wife and I used to direct an organization called Global Roots, spelled routes. And their gap year programming was akin to what it would be like to go on a mini Peace Corps experience. You would be a student who would meet another group of students who were, in country, say in Ecuador. You would have one group program director there. You'd spend about a week orienting yourself to the space, understanding language, money, customs, how to get your needs met. And then you'd be dropped off in a community, probably an hour away from your program director by public transport. And you might see that person once a week or once every other week. You might get together with the whole group once or twice a month at most. It was very remote. You were doing a lot on your own, and that kind of program effectively doesn't exist anymore. Both because students don't want it, and it feels terrifying for them, and because ultimately programs can't sell it. This is so far away from the student experience of most US based, grown young adults that it's so far out of bounds. We have so many steps to go to before most students would even want to get close to getting there. And so what that has meant is a shift away from what we would consider, developing infrastructure oriented country spaces. So a move towards places like Costa Rica, where English is pretty widely spoken, even though you're going to hear Spanish all around you, where the roads are fundamentally pretty good, where even rural family homes have flushing toilets and not outhouses somewhere. We've seen a huge move towards Europe. European programming essentially didn't exist in the gap year space 10 years ago. Now almost every gap year program has offerings in Europe. And we've just seen a whittling down of the number of students that want to go to these places of kind of greater cultural difference. Some of that might be that students have already traveled a lot in their lifetimes. And I think it more harkens to a recent wilderness expeditionary programs kind of internal joke that nobody wants to poop in the woods anymore, right? Young adults are just not accustomed to this idea of really roughing it in the same way because maybe they didn't grow up car camping like many of us did, right? We grew up with families who were raised in the 50s and 60s, post World War II. You had a lot of, dads returning who ultimately had been camping and doing a lot of that. And it was the rise of camping in the United States and all of these amazing state parks. And, we had an era where a lot of young adults had experience in the outdoors, young adults of some level of affluence. And today we just don't see that as often. Young adults are wanting to maybe go out and challenge themselves, but they want it to be the day trip. They don't want to sleep under a tarp for 35 straight days like I did in my Outward Bound instructor course, right? That is not what they want to do for the most part. So we have seen a lot of changes. Programs have had to try and change and adapt as well. Some of them have done that more effectively than others. We are wanting to meet students, right? I think we all genuinely believe that the program model matters much less than the experience of actually taking yourself out of your comfort zone. And so the programs that have been effective in doing this have adapted to the population and where they truly are and need to be met today. And they are actually thriving because they've done that. And they're not holding fast to the way that it was done 15 years ago, because that's just not as attractive to as many students today.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I think if we don't adapt, then we're gonna die. I mean, like from
Yep.
programmatically or even from a policy perspective. I mean, if we're rigid about cell phone use, if we have policies in place from the late 90s compared to, what we have now, it just doesn't make any sense. Even though there's something to be said about divorcing oneself from technology and having these like gaps of time from the phone. Um, but we're not going to convince kids to do that easily. I
Right.
want I want to shift gears a little bit. We haven't talked about this too much. We've been kind of talking about students. Some of these are high school students that are rising up to college. Some are in college. Let's look at a different set of institutions, colleges and universities. What do you think universities can be doing differently? What are they doing well to support the gap time, as you refer to it? Because there's also, I don't know if it's necessarily a competition, but there's a study abroad semester. A lot of universities are pushing now
Mhm.
or offering. Um, Universities also don't talk too much. They don't really encourage taking time off for medical or mental health support. Um, yeah, I mean, how do you all connect with universities or the programs that you work with? And what do you think universities can be doing differently? What are they doing well right now?
Mm. Well, I want to start with what they're doing well, because again, I think I sit in a place objectively sympathetic to the plight of universities today. So many of your listeners might know, but we just hit the population plateau, right? Right now, there are fewer 18-year-olds than there were 5 years ago, and there will be fewer 18-year-olds for the foreseeable future because people are just having less children. That we've hit it. This is it. You can look at it. Statisticians have looked at it, and colleges have been looking at it for the better part of 7 years, preparing for this moment. They know that they are now in a more competitive space to try and get students onto their campuses. And the outcome of that, the fallout of that, is that we have seen quite a few small colleges not be able to keep up and compete, not be able to offer the same kinds of things that other more resourced or endowed colleges and universities have. And we're watching those schools close at a rather alarming rate. And their boards of trustees really having to think about what kind of an endowment needs to happen in a year where they might not have a boom year, and what is going to see them through. So there is a part of me that really feels a measure of sympathy for a college which, let's just take it at face value, that their mission is to help educate young adults and to be able to offer them more skills and knowledge to be successful out in the adult life and in their adult lives. So if we just take it from that framework, I think colleges, it has been really challenging for them in the last few years. I think it's going to get even more challenging, and we're going to watch that. Beyond that, COVID did not support colleges very well because if you remember when COVID really struck public attention in the United States, it was right in the moment in the spring when colleges were announcing where students had gotten in, and yet they couldn't announce what life was going to be like on college campuses in September of 2020. And we saw in the gap year space a huge flood of students who said, I'm not going to be masked, sitting in my dorm room, eating a brown bag lunch that I picked up, and had to hand sanitize my hands to just bring it back to my space and learn on Zoom. Like, that's not college. That's not the bargain. That's not what I worked hard for. So we saw a huge influx of gap year students in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Frankly, it was maybe the biggest boom that we've ever seen in our space. So what have colleges done well? Well, I think colleges have tried to actually double down into the student experience and really hear what it is that students want and try and create those amenities for students. And of course, if you have more money, you're going to be the bigger winner in that. That's just the reality of the environment we live in. And from the gap year standpoint, 10 years ago, there were not nearly as many schools in the United States that were supporting students to defer their acceptance for a year so that they could take gap time. And part of this is self-serving for the colleges, right? It means that if you have a student who's committed to you in, say, for the fall of 2025, but they're telling you will come in the fall of 2026, you got a bird in the hand and you can accept someone off the wait list. Like, boom, that's a win for them. They know how much attrition is going to happen. They know that students are going to be dropping out and transferring schools. You know, you have a guaranteed gapper who's going to come back to you. Yes, I'll take it. And so colleges have been much more pro gap year, partially for that reason, but also I think that they are seeing the value of students who are coming onto campus after having taken a gap year. And there's a lot of research. I don't want to bore you with a lot of it, but I'll hit you with a few of the highlights, which is if you look at all the studies that have been done on gap year students in the US, and this is some of the studies done by colleges themselves, you see that gap year students outperform their non-gap year peers, right? Students who went right from high school to college every single semester by GPA of their college careers. Like, it is just gap year students kind of blow the statistics, out of the water. It's really amazing. And it's not surprising if you're excited about what you're learning, if you're excited to actually be there, if you know why you're at college, you're going to do better. I didn't know why I was at college for the first 2 years. I took gap time. I went back. I knew why I was there and I knew I wanted to be there and I did better. It's not rocket science. But beyond that, what's interesting is gap year students tend to graduate in 4 years and significantly higher numbers than the typical student. The average graduation rate from a 4-year school today is 6.5 years. That means over 50% of students who go to a 4-year school graduate in an average of 6.5 years. Like, that's terrifying, right? You say for college, it's not a 4-year proposition anymore, right? And for most students, it's not. And so gap year students tend to graduate in 4 years in much higher numbers. They tend to transfer a lot less often. So I think schools are looking at this and saying, oh, a gap year student is a really good candidate to be a student on our campus. They're probably going to do good things while they're here. They're probably going to be a more satisfied alumni base. So I think colleges actually have opened up a lot more to having gap year students. And the other thing that I just want to compliment colleges on is that in my role at the Gap Year Association, one of the major benefits of becoming an accredited program is that you're able to leverage a relationship that Gap Year Association has with the University of Montana. And we are able to offer college credit-based courses that accompany your gap year program. So students are not like studying, furiously while they're on program. They're actually doing work before the program. They're keeping a really comprehensive journal while on program, and then they write their papers after the program. So it doesn't interfere with the experience. But students can earn a transcript, and that could be anywhere between 3 and 9 or 12 credits for their semester. And not only can they earn those credits, but they can leverage a 529 fund to pay for the credits, and they can pay for that gap year program fee of $15,000 a semester or whatever it is. So colleges, and many of them, have actually been more likely to accept those credits earned during a gap year than they were 10 years ago. And we're seeing many more schools saying, okay, like I see where this might fit in your college career. Not every school will do it, but a lot more are willing to entertain the idea of those credits. So I think colleges are doing a good job in that way. What could colleges be doing better? I think I think it would be really amazing if in the next 5 to 10 years, we saw colleges fully embrace the gap year as a part of higher educational experience, because we're all saying this is a good thing. We're all saying these students come on campus more mature. We're all saying, wow, this student has a much clearer idea of what they want to study, and they're much less likely to drop out or transfer from this school. So that's all a win-win for everyone. And so what I love a college to say is it's kind of universal that you can get college credit during your gap year, because again, I think that there are a lot of students that are hungry for this, and the work that they're putting in, the growth learning that they're putting in, is worthy of college credit. I genuinely believe that. So I would really love to see colleges embrace this in even a more meaningful way. And additionally, I would really love to see a way that federal financial aid, FAFSA, were able to be utilized to be able to support students in taking gap time. It is currently not available for students to be able to use. And that is just a shame, because so many young adults don't have access to a 529 fund, and their parents couldn't save for a gap year because they'd never thought about it, or it's just not in the cards. And so being able to help students afford gap time, I think would be really positive. And we've seen this, Rob. I mean, we've seen some programs that have really leaned into relationships with colleges, and they have created essentially like a first year abroad experience, whether through the university or separate from the university, with an agreement that all of those credits will transfer. And I think some of those students are almost getting the best of all worlds by being able to do that. So those are some of the thoughts that I have for you. Gap year students are an asset to these college campuses. And so I would love to see that more holistically embraced, because I think if we looked at the number of students that during their gap year decided they didn't want to go to the school that they had committed to, I think it'd be a super tiny fraction of the number of students that actually chose to just continue right on as they'd planned.
Yeah, I, a few thoughts to follow up with that. From my clinical work, the time that I see kids drop off, drop out, head home
Yeah,
is
right.
right after winter break and then right
Mhm.
after spring break.
Yep.
Which is interesting because you think that like, oh, they get rejuvenated enough to come back to campus. They've actually been thinking about not going back.
Yep.
And once there is a separation between them and school, it's easier for them to stay away.
Yeah.
And yet with the gap year, you take that same kid, you put them into a situation where there is some experiential education, there's debriefing, there's processing. I mean, a lot of these moving parts, they're more likely to go back
Yes.
during that time
Yep.
off because it's not really time off.
It's
They're
time
being
on, and
engaged.
that's,
Yeah.
yes, yep, you're right. And they're being engaged and they're feeling successful. And that's another thing, which is there's just so many students who don't feel successful academically, right? Like what a pressure cooker, like what a standard that we have today that we're asking students to measure up against. And I think you're right. I think that all of these things do benefit these young adults in their lives. And we talk about gap year as kind of being just like right after high school, right before what's next. But both of my periods of gap time that I think about as periods of gap time happened in college or immediately after college. And we're seeing a growing group of college graduates who are taking this time, not just med students who have been pretty typically taking gap time right after they graduate from undergrad before med school, but we're talking about, folks who are graduating with BA or BS who are thinking about going on to whatever is next for them, but choosing to take this time. And I think that it really can benefit the students who are in college who are looking for just a different iteration of success. My my least favorite scenario is the student who thought about taking gap time, decided for whatever multitude of reasons, which there are many reasons that students cite that they don't take it, went on to college and then ended up having to drop out, after that fall semester because they're just, they're not able to manage being there for one reason or another. That is devastating. And I will tell you, as someone who effectively felt like he was dropping out of school when I left college, it was really demoralizing. How could I have possibly felt this successful up to this point in my life and I'm literally not able to stay in school? Like how could that possibly be happening right now? And I think my parents were wondering the same thing.
Yeah, because I mean, when we look back on it, the path is so obvious.
Yeah,
But when you're in it, there's nothing ahead of you.
nope,
There's nothing because college for all its pros and cons, and whether it's accurate or not, it's it's selling you a this very linear path and it's selling you kind of a social contract of you're going to show up, you're going to pay this money, we're going to give you a degree, and then there's going to be a career on the other side.
right.
That's at least like this linear thing that I kind
Yeah.
of understand. But if I take time off, there is no plan.
Right. And that paradigm is actually truly just punting the ball 4 years or 6.5 years down the field because I wrote a piece when I graduated college because I had this moment of realizing that when I graduated school, it was like I was walking on a bridge that was low-lying to water, right? I had been on this bridge, all my buddies were walking on this bridge. We were all kind of doing our own thing, but we were all doing it together. And then we reached the end of this bridge that actually just led way out into the middle of the ocean. And everyone's like, okay, jump on in. Like, here you go. Here's adult life. Good luck. And a bunch of us kind of wrapped it up together for a while, but then each of us floated off our own ways. There were a few committed, busy bees who had gotten their internships and they were on like the fast track. They had an outboard motor and they were zooming towards their law degree. But the rest of us were like, oh my gosh, like university did not prepare me to be an adult, right? And it's not actually professing to do that. And that's where I think taking what we can call gap time, you can call whatever you want to call it, just getting out in the world and building your own independence, your own self-reliance, so that when you are graduating, you're like, okay, I may not know where this is all headed, but I do know how to exist confidently as an adult and stand on my own 2 feet. I can cook myself some of these meals. I know how to apply for a job. I have a sense about money. I know that what I don't want to do is go move back into my parents' basement. Like these are the things that take a lot of students by surprise. And a gap year, I think, has helped a lot of students build those skills, right? Our nephew, who is graduating, who had an amazing period of gap time himself, he has the skills to stand on his own 2 feet. He is suffering through what many people do in this kind of quarter life crisis of like, how do I get a meaningful job? But he's doing it and he is still able to manage it all on his own, right? He's not having to retreat. And I'm watching a lot of young adults who have to retreat. And that's also demoralizing. You just achieved this amazing thing. You finished college. Like, oh my gosh, you feel like the only option is to go home. That's too bad. Like we failed you somewhere along the way there.
Uh, so along those lines, I wonder if you have an example of a student that you've worked with over the years where and I know you've kind of hit upon a few like students, including your nephew, but I wonder if there's someone that stands out in terms of just the significant impact that um, gap time had for them, and maybe specifically like a program that they were in, and maybe there was a mental health aspect to it, or something going on with the family, or but yeah, I wonder if you have anyone in mind that has
Yeah.
significantly benefited.
I have a few students who come to mind, and I do want to highlight a few of those students who their mental health was an important aspect of their
Mm.
gap time. And I will say that, if one looks at an intake form for us at J2 Guides right now, and you looked at an intake form, 15 years ago. I would say that the majority of students that we see today looking to take gap time are diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, some kind of executive functioning disorder, anxiety, many things that, 15 years ago weren't as, I think if you looked at the statistics, you wouldn't have seen as many diagnoses. I think we've come a long way actually in being able to support young adults. But that number might have been 30% before. Maybe it's 80% of the applicants now. And
Mhm.
I'm not actually, many of these students are going on to top name schools, right? These are not students who have lost their way and who are really floundering around, which we work with some of those students too. And that's some people's, that's their scenario. I think it's just a really stressful time to be a young adult. I've mentioned that before. And so I will just hit upon that because I think mental health is front and center for a lot of young adults. And even if you're a high achiever, maybe especially if you're a high achiever, this is hard. So one student who really comes to mind, I won't use her name. I'll call her Juliet. How about that? So Juliet, her her mother actually was diagnosed with a pretty significant mental disorder, and it's something she'd grown up with in her lifetime, but her mother wasn't able to take care of her. She lived predominantly with her dad, and I think this was pretty devastating to her growing up as a teenager. And so she got into an amazing school, Colorado College. It's a really amazing educational program, and she decided that she wanted to take gap time. And I've stayed really closely connected with this student because the impact of going on a program, it was with Carpe Diem Education, which is one of the most well-established international gap year based experiences. And she went on a program to Central America, and it was, to be cliche, it was pretty much life-changing for her. And she would use those words in the sense that she gained a sense of herself outside of what it meant to be part of her family's life and the challenges that were occurring within that space. She got a sense of her own confidence, her own self-worth in a way that she hadn't experienced before. She was an excellent student. I mean, if you get into Colorado College, you basically have to be an exceptional student, which she was. But what was so significant is that she came to us after having had one gap experience that was so hard and then went to Carpe Diem and found this amazing experience for herself. And I think part of the reason it was so amazing is because she aligned with a program that had similar values to her own. She aligned with a program that is for people who want to communicate and for people who want to learn how to be great communicators within community. And that's who she is, and that's who Carpe Diem is. And that was exactly what she needed at the right time. And I've kept up with her. She's continued to travel the world. She graduated from college. She has had some, a non-linear path as well. She was living down in South America for a while, and she ran this awesome surf-based taco truck. And then she came back home and she started working on a farm, and she realized that food has continued to be really important for her. And so now she continues to grow food, and she has a series of gap year students that work on the land with her, and they sell this high quality organic food, and they also produce food for people who don't have food. And that was her path. And again, she could have done anything. She is capable of doing anything, but I think the thing that's so great is she's doing what she's passionate about. And I mean, in the end, like, what else is there? Money is important, but I was just reading an article that was saying that today, kind of this generation of young workers has decided that the quality of life, the balance between work and life is more important than money. And that is the first time a generation has said that. But they're like, I don't want to work this 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week schedule that you want me to work, Silicon Valley. Like, I want to be a human. I want to have a family. I want to travel. I want to pursue the things that I care about. So this student, Juliet, I think really embodies someone who found her way to her path. I'll talk about another student. We'll call him Trevor. So he was not bound for college. And actually, he came to a gap year having no idea what his point B after high school graduation was going to be. He loves skiing. His moms, he has two moms, were really supportive of him doing something that most parents would be terrified of, which is Yes, you can go out to Utah and you can go work at a ski mountain and you can work an entire season out at that ski mountain. And I mean like 6 months of work. And they're like, go for it. You love this and we want you to do it. Trevor goes out, he works, he lives with a bunch of 25-year-olds who are still working as at the ski mountain after not going to college. All of these 25-year-olds are like, Trevor, you should go to college. Like, don't do this. Don't do what we're doing. I know it's fun, but like, don't be here in 5 years. He heeded that message. He went on and applied to University of Utah. He ended up going to school there. He continued working at the mountain in his free time. He went to school, he's graduated, and he's working in outdoor recreation because he loves the outdoors and wants to work in that space. Amazing. So these are two students who I think really are emblematic and come from very different ends of the spectrum. You have a student who's going to one of the top schools in the country and one of the most competitive to get into, and you have another student who had no idea if he even wanted to go to college, and Gap Time helped inform that. I feel like more than ever this year, we're seeing young adults who are needing to balance mental health wellness within their programs. These are not students who need a therapeutic program. They're not adjudicated. They haven't had a serious self-harm incident, right? These are students who are just like, I actually still want to keep talking to my therapist every week. How can we do that? And this is another thing that programs have leaned into, which is if you have more of a residential model where you're living in one place, but you're spoking out and doing adventures every day, but coming home, that means you have a predictable schedule. That means you can teach these basic life balancing skills to a lot of young adults. That means they can have a relationship with their mental health specialist. And so many students, I mean, I could name 5 students right now who that is specifically why they're choosing a particular program model because that's what they want for themselves. So, a great example, 2 really great examples of programming like this, 3 really great examples of programming like this would be Dynamy Internship Year, which is based out of Massachusetts. It's a 50-year-old plus program that supports students in gap year settings to go take internships. The Good Life Gap Year up in Maine, which is just this incredible outdoor connected art oriented program. It is not a wellness organization. It is for students who are excited, who want to learn about philosophy, who are interested in engaging academic topics, but it has a really wonderful ability for students who want to stay connected with their own wellness to be well because they're living in one place. Irish Gap Year over in Ireland and Bundoran has 3 amazing programs, 2 of which are residential, living in one spot. Again, students are getting that outdoor adventure, they're getting that art-based experience, but they're having a chance to kind of live in what would be like pseudo dorm-like experience. And there's lots of programs like these that are supporting students.
I I could imagine a parent listening to this saying, I want my kids to be happy.
Yep, that's all we want.
But
Yep.
but this terrifies me. This whole idea about them.
Yes.
You know what? If I want organic food, I'll go to Whole Foods.
Sure.
Now,
Yes.
and I'm not saying that like I necessarily subscribe to this, but I can imagine parents thinking this way, that this is terrifying, that you're going to turn my kid into some sort of back to earth, what, even though you and I know the value of this, parents may not. So what do you say to those parents that might be more focused on Stanford instead of Colorado College, you know, and
Totally.
med school, law school, rather than anthropology,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
even worse, mental health, like
Yeah.
psychology. No,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you say to parents that have more of an eye on um, meeting certain socioeconomic strati goals and
Yeah.
yeah,
I say, well, here's what I say. I see you and I hear you and I honor that you are feeling afraid of that. And I think this is the scariest part about taking gap time is that you can't see around many of the river bends. Like if you're going to jump in that stream, it's going to be hard to know what's around the bend. And it's not because the reality is your young adults is exactly who they have always been. Juliet was probably always going to gravitate towards the farm. Her father owns a farm. The apple does not fall far from the tree in this scenario. She's capable of all of the things that she could want to do. But the reality is, this was a life that she knew and felt familiar to her. I know that every parent, when I'm talking with them, I'm having an informational interview, they're like, my child's not going to go off and like become part of like an ashram, right? Like they're not going to like go away and then never come back. And the reality is, the only who's done that, who told his parents that that's what he was going to go do. And that's what he really wanted to do. And they knew up front before they chose the gap year that that is what was going to happen. And that person did that. What we see in the gap year is that students pursue things that are important to them. But if you go through a well thought out, a well crafted process of, we talk about this at J2 Guides all the time, the what is your why? Why are you doing this? What is your motivation? Why are you taking gap time? Is it because you're burnt out from school and what you need is a little bit of a hands-on learning experiential break from the hardcore books that you've been learning from? Okay, that's really important to know. Is it because you actually just want to work on these amazing skill sets that you didn't? Very different types of gap year experiences. Is it because you want to stabilize your mental health and wellness? That's a very different type of gap experience. And so when parents are looking at this, I want them to see it as a gap year doesn't exist like this. It isn't just this truncated experience. It's all part of this. So it is everything that has led to this point with your child. And then it is supposed to be leading to this next point for your child. And this is where, which is really hard, we have to have an adult conversation with our child who's not fully an adult, or certainly not in the same chapter of adulthood that we are. But that young adult, it's time that they do take agency, right? We want them to take ownership for themselves. We want them to make well thought out decisions. We can help them do that. But we actually have to have the conversation, not as father and son, but as older, wise adult, sage, who's lived a lot of life, and younger adults who could learn a lot from that person who's lived a lot of life. And we need to find common ground to talk on and listen and do a really good job listening. And so when a family comes to us, say J2 Guides, or they call Gap Year Association, and I answer, when we're talking to them, what we're trying to talk about is, let's help set intentional goals for this time that we all agree on, that are collaborative, that are going to feel like the right use of resources and money and time for a family, that feel like they are managed enough from a risk standpoint that parents are going to be able to sleep at night. And that this young adult who's the bold, courageous one who's actually stepping out into the world, they feel like they are excited by and that they are not in over their heads. And it is that delicate balance, I think, that is the essence of gap year. And when families lean in, I have a student right now, this I love her parents because she is so independent and her parents are on every call quietly in the background, just listening to their daughter. And their daughter is saying things that would make most parents' hair stand on end in terms of the independence she wants. And they're like, no, she's worked, she's earned this. She has worked her way to this. We believe she can do it. We believe that she can do the things she's aspiring to do. And that, I think, right there is the greatest gift that they can offer because it's real and it's realistic. And everyone is actually operating on the same page of reality. And so for a family that's looking at this, I just want to say it's a part of the educational journey, and your child is going to be encountering it no matter what. It's just whether or not they're encountering it at the end of the bridge or before they step foot on the bridge. But the value of them diving into it before they step on the bridge is that they're going to be way more ready to step off of that low-lying, right at water level bridge of graduating from college, let's say, when they get there in the next few years. That is them sailing confidently towards success versus floundering around in an inner tube, wondering what way the current is going to blow them, which is not what we want for our young adults. And so, again, this doesn't have to be earth-shaking. The gap year doesn't have to be abroad. It doesn't have to be out of your home state. Gap time can be a realistic step for every family as long as the dialogue is there.
I want to switch gears again, and I
Sure.
I would love to hear what, because you sound like you strike me as a very curious person, um and that you're always consuming and processing information from probably a lot of different sources. And I wonder, like, what books, podcasts, YouTube channels you are being influenced by, what you're consuming that you think would be either helpful in a very specific way for students or parents of students, um, either they're directly connected to gap time and gap year programs, or just more generally. I know that we talked about like some authors and some some books before we started recording, but yeah, like anything of note that you think could be valuable.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you asked this because I think we all want resources. And, my wife and I, as gap year coaches and all of our accredited, consultant colleagues, that's where we're dealers of information. And that's our trade. Our trade is in resources. We want to offer people reputable, valuable resources. So I'll start with the gap year, right? So let's start in the micro and then we can expand to the macro if there's time and interest in that. I actually think there's been some really excellent books written about the gap year over the years. And some of these, you might be like, wow, 2009, like, is it of value? Yeah, it's of value because the concept of gap time is almost universal. It's almost like innately human, in that what we're looking at here is the possibility of being able to grow in meaningful ways and to be mentored in meaningful ways and to have experiences that help us frame shift and the lenses through which we look at the world. And so, one of the books that I love, and I've had a chance to work with Kristen on this over multiple years and multiple iterations of the book, is it's called The Complete Guide to the Gap Year. And what I love about the book is just that Kristen White takes a very comprehensive approach to looking at why students take gap time, what are the modalities that students are interested in, and what are they actually exploring. So, what is it that they do during their gap year, and how do you get a student excited about the possibility of this? And then not only that, but it's like what happens after a student has taken that gap time, and what are the outcomes, and what do we see happening on college campuses and other places that young adults who've taken gap year gravitate towards. So the Complete Guide to the Gap Year is one that I love. A student, excuse me, a really amazing journalist, Andrea Ween, came into the gap year space a number of years ago, and immediately I felt drawn to this person. And one of the reasons I felt drawn to her was because she was not from the gap year space. She was not an educator or a gap year educator. She was an investigative journalist, and she was keen to understand more about the gap year. And she interviewed all of these folks who were in our field and adjacent to the gap year space. And I love it because it's pretty unbiased look at it. And she was brought into the space, and I think she saw a lot of the angles of it. And so the book that she wrote is called Gap to Great: A Parent's Guide to the Gap Year. And I think for family members who are asking that question, who are saying, I'm afraid of this choice for my child, they get a lot of their questions answered. And I think Andrea helps assuage a lot of the concerns and fears that people have about taking gap time. Another book that I think is really interesting was called The Gap Year Advantage. This was written by Ray Nelson and Carl Hagler. They are a married couple, both of them who have been involved in incredible professional lives and careers that are worth looking up, just as the amazing humans and professionals that they are. The contributions they've made to the United States and to the world are quite significant, in my opinion. And they had a son, Adam, who took a gap year. It really changed his perspective, and they were so inspired. They actually wrote two books about the gap year, but I think The Gap Year Advantage, helping your child benefit from time off before or during college, is just kind of this quintessential book that looks at taking gap time. So I love that as well. Another amazing book, I'll just briefly touch on it, was by Joseph O'Shea, and he is just an amazing individual as well. And so, look up Joe O'Shea. He's got a couple of publications on gap year. One of our colleagues, Julia Rogers, she founded En route Consulting. She is an accredited gap year consultant. She has been the head of the outreach committee of the Gap Year Association essentially since it was founded. She is our board president emeritus. She is all involved in all parts gap year. She started something called Gap Year Radio, and I really think it's fun. It's all of these incredible gap year podcasts with students, with programs, with other professionals talking about the gap year. And I think if you're looking for someone to have an entryway into gap year, that's a pretty phenomenal opportunity. And then I actually just pulled this off the shelf. I've been reading this book, Reimagining Your Gap Year, The Watershed Experience. It's by Bruce Andrews. And Bruce has been a part of the educational field for many decades. And he is framing the gap year in the metaphor of a watershed moment, as well as a watershed like a true watershed, the draining of all of these amazing things into one critical space. And he wrote a book that is part workbook, part sagely wisdom, and I think it's a really fun book. It just came out, actually. He just sent us a copy of it. So those are a few of the gap year resources that I think are great. One book, and you and I did talk about this recently, it's one of the books that I just read. It's called The Comfort Crisis, and it's by Michael Easter. And this book had a big impact on me because Michael Easter does a lot of reporting for journalistic endeavors like Outside Magazine and Men's Health. And this book is one part new science about everything that's important to us today. Diets and nutrition, attention span, technology use, exercise, overall mental wellness and health. And the other part of it is a detailed description and illustration of his going on this hunt in the Arctic. He's not a hunter. And what his experience is with discomfort in these moments. And the reason I think that this is profound, and I found it quite easily digestible, is because we live in probably the most comfortable time in all of human history. There's so little that we truly have to do, and there's so little discomfort that many of us in a particular economic echelon experience, although we are suffering all the time, right? I mean, there's no doubt about that. We can hold both of those things gently, but the reality is there's problems coming from the fact that we're just too darn comfortable. And there's a lot of health-based problems that are coming from that. There's a lot of mental health challenges that are coming from that. And it's all documented science. And his challenge to all of us is basically to take the stairs, like do the hard thing. Do the hard thing when it's in front of you, because effectively right now, we always have the choice to do it easier. We always have the choice to eat more calories. We always have the opportunity to do less work in terms of physical work. And his challenge would be we could actually benefit and we're actually more adapted to doing the hard thing. And there's all of these amazing benefits. Why? If you're a gap year student, I can't, recommend highly enough the classic Paulo Coelho book, The Alchemist. It is an amazing journey, and it is a metaphysical deep dive into what it means to live a meaningful life. So I definitely think that'd be amazing. Ooh, and I'm gonna grab a book. Hold on one second. One of my closest friends and running partners, Nicholas Triolo, just published his book. It's called The Way Around, a field guide to going nowhere. Nicholas is an incredible writer. I think he's one of the most beautiful writers that I've gotten to encounter in the real world. He is deeply interested in the personal experience, and his book, he's an incredible athlete. He's a world-class trail runner. He has won several really big races and competed in other very notable races and performed really well there. He and I have run many miles together, and he is fascinated by the journey not of conquering peaks, but the insightful journey of going around. And he is curious about this idea of rather than achieving a specific objective with nothing beyond it, really doing the deep, insightful work of going inward. And so it's part meditation, it's part adventure story. And I think for any young adult who is looking for somebody who is reflecting on his own experience as a young adult in his travels, something like The Way Around is going to hit home really hard because it is about the environment. It is about the human race. It's about our experience as a species on this planet. And so I think you might enjoy that too.
Those are fantastic. I especially love the comfort crisis as we talked about before,
Yeah,
because I love it when authors they just provide an unvarnished version of just how awful something is, and
exactly.
he did not try to make it sound like, oh, I went through this thing and it was easy for me. He talked about it being a sufferfest in Alaska and then all the way up. Yeah, that
And
was
and also I love that in that book, it's not I don't think it feels like like he's writing his like trophy piece. Like, look at me and look at this hard thing that I did. I think he's like, I did this hard thing because this thing would be hard for me, and you should consider doing whatever's the hard thing for you. Like these are, it's not about a scale tipping more one way or another. It's more of like, I found value in this. I think you might find value in doing something like this too.
right, right. Well,
Yeah,
I will make sure that everything that you referenced, everything we talked about, will be in the show notes with links and details and all of that, including the list of books and all the resources as well.
great.
Wh- What is the so let's go ahead and wrap things up. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Because you're doing so many different things. What's the easiest way for people to contact you? Because I can imagine
Sure,
that people have just random questions, even if they're not pursuing gap time or a gap
sure.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah. So, in my work as a gap year counselor, you can always reach out to me. My name is Jason, so Jason at the letter J, the number two, and the word guides, plural.com. So Jason at j2guides.com. The other J in there is my wife, Jane, the word the J2. And then if you're interested in reaching me at the Gap Year Association, it's Jason at gapyearassociation.org. And I really recommend that you have a look at the Gap Year Association. We are going to be relaunching our website here at the end of the month. And I think it's going to be even more useful and supportive for all of you who are thinking about gap time. It is a bastion of all research we can get our hands on related to gap year. It is a place to go to find out about amazing gap year programs. Again, just touching back, our member organizations have demonstrated a lot just to even become members. And of course, our accredited programs are, just really showing their incredible work and demonstrating that. So check it out. It's got a lot of great resources for you. It's a great place to go if you're looking for community and inspiration.
great. Jason,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it. I thought I knew a lot about gap time, gap year, and I learned a ton.
Thanks,
And
Rob.
and I imagine that there's even more for us to learn about this. But I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And, one thing I really have enjoyed in our connections together is I think both of us have led really authentic lives to ourselves. And of course, that's a gift and a real privilege to be able to pursue those lives. And, if we just operate under this principle of it's this one life, um, I can only encourage young adults to do the best they can to just to identify what is important to them and do their best to follow that course because the reality is we don't know what's around those river bends, but if we have been true to our own integrity, the likelihood is that you're going to be making choices that are in line with that the whole way, and that life is going to feel full, contented, and worth having really engaged in.
I love it. All right, man. Thanks so much.
Great to talk with you. Thank you.
All right. Before you head off, I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in today. All of the resources discussed are in the show notes below. And one last thing, if you know anyone that would benefit from this episode, please forward it along to them. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to my podcast, the YouTube channel, and the newsletter.